Welcome to the Oracle Speaks. I am the Village Elliot, your host. I'm here to tell you about the past, present, and future of the Cleveland Browns. In fact, the immediate future. For several hours after the Denver Broncos lost to the New England Patriots, I thought that the Browns had actually clinched a playoff position. And the reason I thought that was that the Denver Broncos were one of the few teams that are in the playoff hunt that actually owned a tiebreaker against your Cleveland Browns, because the Denver Broncos had beaten the Cleveland Browns earlier in the season. However, I found after many hours of investigation through the NFL tiebreaker procedure, there is a scenario whereby the Browns could still manage to lose out, have 10 victories, be tied with a bunch of teams, and still not make the playoffs. So it is a time for great celebration because the Browns had a tremendous victory on Sunday, coupled with a number of key losses by teams that are the Browns' rivals. The Browns have a huge probability of making the playoffs, but it is the Cleveland Browns, and anything less than 100%, it's just not quite there yet, but it's within our grasp. It's so close. It's almost impossible to screw this up. I'll tell you all about it. Let me turn down the music here so that I can think. And by the way, thank you again to Free Sound Music for providing the music for our show. This, of course, is Joy to the World, and somehow it's managed to be non-copyrighted music. I don't know how that's possible. It seems like everything, even things that you learned as nursery rhymes when you were a kid, wind up getting copyrighted by some kind of music house. But anyway, thank you very much. And here we are. So I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation with you. Give me just a second. And let me boot this little dude up. And hang on, present, share screen, window. Why didn't the Browns clinch? Let's share that. Let's magnify it. Let's go to slideshow from the beginning. Okay, so what happens? After the Patriots beat Denver, the Broncos can no longer tie the Browns at 10 wins. And that's very big because they owned the tiebreaker versus Cleveland. Now it doesn't matter because even if they win out, the best they can do is make 9 wins versus 10 for Cleveland. 10 is more than 9. Broncos cannot tie the Browns for the wild card tiebreaker. Now, there are maybe other ways that the Broncos can make the playoffs if a bunch of teams lose a bunch of games and wind up having a tiebreaker at the 9-win point. So I'm not saying that the Broncos are out of the playoffs. I'm just saying that they cannot push the Browns out of the playoffs, okay? So don't misinterpret, please. So I don't want to get any angry letters from Broncos fans. Oh, maybe I do want to get a bunch of angry letters from Broncos fans. So yeah, I don't care. Maybe I'll just use the false information that the Broncos have been eliminated, even though it's not true. I don't care. But okay, let's look at the worst possible case, because that's what we're talking about. What clinching means is that even if you lose out and all of your rivals win out, that you're still in the playoffs. That's what clinching means. If the Browns were to lose out, stall out at 10 wins, what are the other teams that could contend for wild card positions at 10 wins or more? Well, those teams would be Buffalo Bills. They're at 9 wins. Also, our divisional rivals, Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. Both of those teams would need to win twice. They are at 8-7. In fact, everybody in the world is at 8-7. Over in the AFC South, there are 3 teams that are currently tied at 8-7. That would be Jacksonville, Indianapolis, and Houston. Okay, now let's think about what's going on here. The Browns have already beaten Cincinnati twice. Okay, so we own a tiebreaker against the Bengals. The Browns have also beaten Jacksonville. They have beaten Indianapolis. They have beaten Houston. That sounds pretty good. And we've split versus Pittsburgh. That sounds pretty good, but that's going to come back and bite us a little bit. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. Buffalo, over in the AFC East, is, pardon me, is the only team that we have to worry about. They could win 9 if they lose out, 10 if they go 1-1, or they could win 11 games. And so they are the only candidate to win a wild card from the AFC East. No, Jets fans, you are not going to the playoffs this year. I mean, the press from New York really makes me want to throw up. They think that they're going to the playoffs every year, all the time. And yes, you've got Aaron Rodgers on your active roster right now. It don't matter, man. But we're going to play these guys on Thursday, and we'll just see what happens. You've got Aaron Rodgers. We've got Joe Flacco. I like our chances pretty well. And if we beat the Aaron Rodgers and Jets on Thursday, it all becomes moot. But anyway, the other teams that I just mentioned have to win out to get up to 10. The Browns already have 10 wins, so there's a big difference there. But, okay, for a long time I thought that the Browns had clinched with their 10 wins, which are better. All right, now let's talk about what the tie-breaking process actually is. I looked it up on the NFL website. And what they do basically is you first apply the tiebreakers within the division to identify who's going to be the candidate team from each division. And then you apply the tiebreakers again between those teams that are at the top wild card candidates from each division. Okay, so you don't consider all of those teams, all those 6-7 teams all together in one pot. You first separate them, pick one team from each division, and then compare 2 or 3 teams, depending on how many divisions are involved, and compare those teams, okay? So we have to first pull one candidate out of the AFC North to send up against the other divisions to participate in that multiple team comparison, and that's where we get a little bit hung up. Okay, we know that Cincinnati cannot be our candidate, but what about the Steelers? We'll get to that. Okay, AFC East, pretty easy. It's going to be Buffalo if there is a candidate. That now they can still lose out. It doesn't have to be them. Okay, but here we go. So the tie-breaking process in all of its glory, and I've simplified the language here to make it simple, but basically what you do first is you go head-to-head. Does one team have an advantage head-to-head? Especially, that's pretty easy if there's only 2 teams involved. If there are 3 teams involved, or 3 or more teams, the head-to-head may not be obvious, but if you've beaten all the other teams that are in the conversation, then you get to go. If not, then you have to go to the next step, which is what about in the division record? Who's got the best division record? That is the problem in our case in the AFC North. Pittsburgh has the best division record. They've lost to the Cleveland Browns, and if they win out, if Pittsburgh wins out, that means that they will have beaten Baltimore, and so they're going to have the best division record if they indeed get up to their 10 wins. They have no choice in order to do that. So they will be 5-1 in the division, And if there's a two-way tie with Cleveland or a three-way tie with the Bengals, doesn't matter. They will be the candidate that will go into the next round uh, with the other divisions to get selected or not for the wild card. They're our first choice to send out to be a wild card from our division, from the AFC North. Okay, so we'll talk about that in just a minute, but just for completeness, uh, after the division record, if they're the same, which they're not in our division, is very clear. Um, Pittsburgh is number one, we're number two, and the Bengals are the worst. But if it were tied, you would then go to the best percentage in common games, and then the best conference record, and then the strength of victory in all games. Okay, it hardly ever gets to that. It might actually get to that point if it came down to a comparison between us and the Chicago, or not Chicago, but the Buffalo Bills. It could go that far in certain circumstances. We're not going to get to that point though. So, just for information. Okay, let me take now some time for a public service message. I used to be a Salvation Army volunteer and work in the Adult Rehabilitation Center over in Dayton. So I want to tell a little bit about how that started since it's Christmas time. Reverend William Booth was the founder of the Salvation Army back in 1852, and he decided to have kind of a different way to hold church. And instead of having a traditional church service, he decided, you know what, I'm going to just work in the poorest parts of London, England, and preach directly to the poor, homeless, hungry, and destitute, rather than the richest people he could find. He could have had a very comfortable life as a preacher, but decided, no, that's not the way I'm going to do it. And so he traveled throughout England, and his converts became volunteers themselves and spread the gospel from one person to the next, and eventually their organization, which at that time was called the Christian Mission, later became the Salvation Army, had 10,000, excuse me, not 10,000, 1,000 volunteers and evangelists within 10 years. Okay, so these people were not the elite among society. They were described on the website of the Salvation Army. This is not my words, but the words from the website. Thieves, prostitute, gamblers, and drunkards. This sounds a lot like some sports bars that I've been to. No. But okay, so they were among the first converts to Christianity. See, there's hope for all of us. In fact, they were also preaching and singing in the streets as living testimonies to the power of God. And they address not just, the church service, but they go to the physical, financial, and emotional well-being of each individual to strengthen the people that they serve. So it was a really cool organization. I really liked what they did, what I helped them with in the rehabilitation center in Dayton, working with ex-convicts in many cases, drug addicts, and really watched how people grew, and it was an opportunity to give to others, and that's really the reward that people in the Salvation Army receive. Is giving is its own reward. Okay, one more view graph, and then I'll pause for our sponsors. Okay, so what do? And I've listed some things here in the red for those of you who have visual. They have, of course, religious services. They also do things like respond to disasters, natural disasters especially. They have social services for food and shelter for people, counseling, youth services, senior centers. Hey, I'm a senior. I would like that. How about that? Christmas programs, and especially, the red kettles and stuff out in front of the stores. Well, that's the Salvation Army. They are very concerned about human and sexual trafficking worldwide. This is something that, they're not just London, England now. They're all over the world, very concerned about this massive worldwide scandal, and they're doing something about it. They also work with veterans support prison services. So they're doing a lot of things, and there's an opportunity for all of us to get involved if we want to. Okay, so that's that. Let me pause now for a few minutes for our commercial sponsors, especially on our sound-only platforms. And Johnny Cleveland, okay, you're up. Go for it. Okay, and we are back. Okay, all right. Let's see, and that's where we started at. Okay, we just said the East is easy. Buffalo South could be one of three teams. The AFC North could be one of three teams. Excuse me, actually, that's not right. The South, actually, one of these teams is going to win the division, and then two of the teams will be wildcard candidates. In the North, we know that Baltimore is probably, well, I should say we don't know it, but they will probably win unless Cleveland manages to win out and Baltimore loses out, and then Cleveland could still be the division champion, I guess. There is nobody from the AFC West that's going to be a wild card candidate this year. So, here we go. And here we go. Okay, Buffalo does not have to be the candidate at 9 wins. They could still lose out, but if they win at least one game out of 2 doesn't seem like too much to ask for, then they would be the AFC candidate and potentially participate in the tiebreaker if they don't win 11. They're playing the Patriots in Miami, and you'd think that they would be able to probably get past the Patriots, but you know, they also have a chance to beat Miami. They handled them pretty well, I think, earlier in the year. And their conference record would tie them with the Browns and Steelers, who are also 7-5, would be 7-5 in their conference record, and they would actually have to go to the 5th tiebreaker, in which case the Buffalo has a much stronger winning margin, and they would become the wild card number 5, or the top wild card position. And so I think as long as they win at least 10 games, Buffalo is in. So that would leave 2 more wild card positions to be decided in this scenario. Okay, so let's say Buffalo gets in, and then there's 2 more to be decided. Okay, and we don't have to worry about the West, but what about the South? This is a little bit more interesting because you have 3 teams that can also potentially win 10 games. Let's go to the AFC South. You've got Jacksonville, Houston, and Indianapolis all sitting there at 8-7. The thing that is really screwed up here for us Browns fans is that Houston beat Pittsburgh, and that means that they own the tiebreaker against Pittsburgh. Even though we own the tiebreaker against Houston, we can't get past Pittsburgh to be the candidate from the AFC North. So if Pittsburgh is the division's highest seed, that means that they would go up for that next wild card position. If on the okay, now they play each other, and Houston versus Indianapolis, and so one team or the other. Let's just say that Jacksonville wins out, and everybody, the 2 teams are at 10-7. The other team can be no better than 9-8. So if Indianapolis wins, beats Houston, both Pittsburgh and Cleveland own the tiebreaker over Indianapolis. And so Indianapolis would not get the wild card in that case, and then Pittsburgh would get the sixth wild card, and Cleveland would get the last wild card in that case. So we kind of need Indianapolis to beat Houston when they play, and that would result in the Browns making the playoffs, even if the Browns lose out. But as I'm pointing out in the bottom, if Houston gets that wild card number 6, then wild card number 7 goes to the highest seed from the AFC North. And let's talk about that in detail. Why is Pittsburgh the highest seed? Well, and again, we're talking about the worst possible case. They haven't played that second game with Baltimore yet, but let's assume that they beat Baltimore. That will give them 2 wins against Baltimore, and they've already beat Cincinnati twice, and they would have a division record of 5-1. That's the best in the division. They would get the first division tiebreaker, and they would go as the division's representative to be the wild card. The Bengals are not going to make it as a 10-7 wild card. I don't think as far as I know, there's no way that they can do that. Now they could, if a bunch of teams lose games and they win out, or they, I think if there's a wild card that's awarded for 9 wins, they have a shot at that. But I don't see how they can possibly, or if Pittsburgh loses all of its games and they're not in the mix. But I don't think that there's a way that Cincinnati ever can get past both Cleveland and Pittsburgh on the tiebreakers. So they would need Pittsburgh to lose out. I think it would be very improbable for the Bengals to make the playoffs, and I'm not quite sure exactly how that works, but I don't think they've been totally eliminated. But basically, everybody in the world has to lose everything, and they could probably make it as a number 7 wild card, the last wild card. So, okay, so Indianapolis beats Houston. Pittsburgh could get in, and the Browns could also get in if everybody has 10 wins. And that speaks to just how difficult it's going to be for the Browns to screw this up. It's almost impossible. Almost impossible to be 10-7 and not make the playoffs this season. So I'm pretty happy about that. But it's the Cleveland Browns, and it's still possible to screw this up. It's still possible. The best way is for the Browns and Joe Flacco to take care of business on Thursday, and that would absolutely clinch it. The New York Jets are one of my least favorite teams in football because of the way that they worship the quarterback position. They are even worse than the Browns ever were about their franchise quarterback and Mr. Wonderful Aaron Rodgers. They have really made a travesty of blaming the quarterback for all of their problems on offense. The fact of the matter is that they just genuinely stink on offense. I cannot imagine that they can come up against the Cleveland Browns and their really good defense, and especially the defensive front. I would be just so very disappointed if the Jets are able to pull out a victory, and especially with Joe Flacco getting a chance to face the team that cut him. What a disgusting decision that was. Basically, the Jets decided to get rid of their veteran quarterbacks. Why? Because they didn't want to hurt the feelings of Zach Wilson, and that really makes me mad. If you've heard this show at all, you know that I really am against the idea of protecting the feelings of quarterbacks and kickers. I think that's nuts. I think that those people need competition in order to survive. and you shouldn't have people with fragile egos in the game of football. Competition is a good thing. You ought to make a point of having a backup quarterback on the practice squad at all times. That, a number 4 quarterback that's just learning the basics is a good thing to have, just so that you can have somebody in case you have multiple injuries at the quarterback position, which is not that improbable. And my position has been borne out this season where we did have to have 4 quarterbacks. And, kudos to the Browns for being able to find Joe Flacco on short notice. That was really a miracle, Christmas miracle. But I don't want to make a habit out of it. I think the Browns have been very, very fortunate, also very skillful. But they need to plan for these kind of situations and just have somebody that they're training for the long term. And you just never know when injuries are going to strike, and you need to have those guys available. Not just give away guys like Joshua Dobbs. It worked this time. Don't do it again. And then the same with kickers. I think you need to have somebody that's learning how to kick in Cleveland Stadium. It's not easy, and a guy that has experience, understands the wind currents, the shape of the stadium, the condition of the field, how it behaves in poor weather, that's very, very valuable. And even if he's a below average kicker, even if he's the 40th best kicker in the NFL, it's very important to have guys like that you can call upon maybe 2 or 3 years down the road. So, okay, I've given that speech. Go get him, Joe Flacco. I can't wait for Thursday, and we'll just see what happens. The Browns are so very close to clinching this playoff position this season. I'm not as scared of Baltimore. Our number 3 quarterback, P.J. Walker, can beat the number 1 team in the NFL, the San Francisco 49ers. There's no reason to be afraid of Baltimore. We already beat them once. Bring on whoever you want. The Cleveland Browns are in this, and I think that they have enough staying power to go the distance. I'm not saying that they're going to win it, but there's no reason why they can't. Take care, everybody. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year, and we'll talk again tomorrow. Take